We have a coronal hole that is rotating into the Earth's strike zone, and it could bring us yet another solar storm. And as a bright region rotates off of the Earth-facing sun, a new bright region rotates on. What does it mean for radio propagation? Those stories and more in the news this week. Space weather this week continues to be quite interesting. We've had a lot of unsettled activity over the past week, and it looks like it's continuing. We've got a bunch of little mini solar storms that keep firing, and this has brought us a little bit of aurora here and there sporadically, and it will probably continue to do so. But the big story is this coronal hole that is going to be rotating into the Earth strike zone here in the next day. Now, it's not a really deep coronal hole, so the storm conditions may not last. It may only be at high latitudes. But there is kind of an extension of this coronal hole, so we're expecting to have some turbulent solar wind easily over the next few days. Now, after that, we also have these two bright regions that are on the Earth-facing sun right now. One of them, which we thought was going to be numbered 2716, has now rotated kind of off of the sun's west limb. It never got numbered because it kind of fizzled a bit. Now we have another fizzling kind of region rotating onto the sun's disk on the east limb, but this one isn't quite as bright, so likely we will end up dropping back down to poor radio propagation conditions here over the next few days as the solar flux does begin to wane a little bit. Switching to your M-flare threat meter, you can see back on the 6th was when we really got excited about a new region that was rotating into Earth view at the time. It was firing off solar flares. It was boosting the solar flux. In fact, we thought it was even going to be numbered region 2716, and then it fizzled. It just kind of went quiet. It never even got a number, so the sun has remained spotless. Luckily, it has been bright enough to boost the solar flux up to the bottom edge of marginal radio propagation, so amateur radio operators have at least been enjoying that. But now it's going to be rotating off of the sun's west limb here in the next few days, and the only thing replacing it is yet another kind of dim region. So we're most likely going to fall back into poor conditions for radio propagation, and that will probably last over the next week. Switching to your solar storm conditions, you can see over the past week or so we've actually been pretty busy. Now, we haven't really bumped up to storm levels at all, but there have been a lot of little mini solar storms that the sun has been kind of firing off, and we've really benefited. We've been sitting about unsettled conditions, and as a matter of fact, we've actually got hit back on July 11th and 12th by a solar storm that gave us some decent aurora shows in many parts of the world, including those that have been fighting the twilight sun in the northern hemisphere. And then we got hit again on the 16th and 17th by another set of solar storms that again didn't bump us up to storm levels but gave us some decent aurora show. And what's nice is that more aurora is in store because we are expecting that fast wind to hit us from that coronal hole here in the next couple days. And although this solar minimum sun is bringing us weaker and weaker solar storms, we're still managing to catch aurora over many parts of the world. This week we saw it over many places in Canada, like here in Manitoba, and it was seen in Saskatchewan, and all over Alberta, even fighting that twilight sun, which is so hard to see aurora through. Now, the aurora dipped down into the United States. We saw it in North Dakota and in Montana. It was seen in Wisconsin and even Washington State. And then down south, the aurora australis was seen in New Zealand and multiple places in Tasmania. So what else does our sun have in store for us this week? Well, this is stereo A. It's our backside monitor. You can see here's Earth, here's the sun, and here's stereo A staring at the sun from behind. And you can see there's actually quite a few features on the backside of the sun for a change. The first thing to look at is that bright region that's kind of in the center disk right there. That region is actually what is beginning to rotate into Earth view and will help boost radio propagation just a little bit. Don't know if it's going to keep us at marginal radio propagation conditions, but at least it's something. The sad thing, however, is the rest of the disk behind that region is pretty blank. So it looks like whatever conditions we get are going to stay like that easily over the next couple weeks. The positive thing, though, is that we do have a coronal hole that's on that back-facing disk, and so that's great news for aurora photographers because you get some more chances for aurora. And since the coronal holes now aren't really all that deep, we might not get really strong storms from them. And so if we get many solar storms, then what's nice about that is that it kind of boosts us to unsettled conditions, which also helps radio propagation, and it also helps GPS at low latitudes. Switching to our solar storm conditions and aurora possibilities over the coming week, we are anticipating the hit from some fast wind from that coronal hole that's rotating into the Earth's strike zone. But this coronal hole isn't all that deep, so we're not expecting a really strong solar storm. At high latitudes, NOAA is expecting minor storm conditions with only about a 40% chance of a major storm. At mid-latitudes, though, we're only expecting unsettled conditions with about a 10 to 15% chance of a minor storm. And these conditions should last for about a day before things begin to settle down, but we are still expecting to have some kind of turbulent solar wind with some pockets of fast wind coming at us here and there. So we're going to be expecting unsettled conditions easily for the next week. So your aurora photographers, you may need to stay on your toes, but you might get multiple chances to catch some shots. Switching to your solar flare and particle radiation storm outlook over the coming week, we are now entering about 3 weeks worth of a spotless sun. Welcome to solar minimum, folks. This is pretty much what it looks like. So, of course, everything is in the green when it comes to solar flares. The lucky thing is we actually do have 2 unnumbered regions on the Earth-facing disk right now. They're not strong enough to have numbers, but they are bright enough to boost radio propagation just a little bit. They've got the solar flux hovering at just the low end of marginal. Unfortunately, one of those regions is beginning to rotate off of the sun's west limb right now, and so radio propagation will tank as the solar flux dives back into poor propagation conditions, and that will probably last through the next week and maybe even the week after that. So the space weather this week is far from quiet. We have a coronal hole that's rotating into the Earth's strike zone. It's going to be sending us some fast wind that could bring aurora easily to high latitudes, possibly even down to mid-latitudes for a short while. And then after this storm wanes a little bit, we're going to have some unsettled conditions with maybe some pockets of fast wind. So aurora photographers really need to stay on their toes because you could get multiple chances for some aurora. Now, amateur radio operators were hovering around the bottom edge of marginal for radio propagation because of the 2 bright regions that are on the Earth-facing disk right now, but one of them is leaving us, and it's going to be rotating to the sun's backside. That leaves us with the weaker of the 2 bright regions, so likely radio propagation and solar flux is going to dip down into poor conditions, and that's probably going to last over the next week, possibly even 2 weeks before we get a reprieve. The positive thing, though, is that if these solar storms are going to be pretty weak, that it can actually boost radio propagation, especially on the night side of Earth. And it's also good news for you GPS operators at low latitudes because weak solar storms actually help kind of stabilize the upper atmosphere and allow pretty decent GPS reception, even in places you normally don't get it. I'm Tamitha Scove. Thank you for watching.